let's dive in. Today, we're tackling modern agriculture. Yeah. It's something we all depend on, but honestly, how much do we really understand about where our food comes from?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things, you kind of just take for granted. We go to the store, load up the cart, but rarely stop and think about like the whole journey it took to get there.
Totally. So we're cracking open The Ultimate Guide to Modern Agriculture by Conrad Riker to really pull back the curtain and see what's going on in the world of farming.
I gotta say, what I found super interesting was how far back Riker goes. Like, he starts way back at the beginning, reminding us that agriculture, it all began with domesticating plants and animals like 10,000 years ago.
It's crazy to think about that whole shift from nomadic life to settlements.
It really makes you think, huh? Okay, so let's get down to it. Riker kicks things off by really emphasizing how crucial healthy soil is. He's like, it's not just dirt, it's a whole ecosystem, like a living thing. Exactly. And he breaks down what soil's made of, in a way that anyone can get. You got your rock particles, organic matter, water, air, and then a whole universe of microscopic organisms.
Just like this bustling city under our feet. What's going on down there?
Oh, all kinds of things. You got bacteria and fungi breaking down stuff, releasing those nutrients that plants need to grow. Earthworms, they're tunneling through, making sure the air and water can move around. It's like a whole web of, interconnected activity going on down there.
Wow, it makes you realize how much we rely on this whole hidden world beneath us.
Absolutely. Riker makes this great comparison to a bank. Farmers, they're making deposits of nutrients with compost and fertilizer, and then the crops, they're making withdrawals as they grow.
I like that. Yeah. Good way to think about it. So is all soil the same?
Oh, not even close. Riker, he talks about this thing called loamy soil and calls it the Goldilocks of soil. It's just the right mix of sand, silt, and clay, perfect for holding on to moisture and all those nutrients.
So it's got to be just right. Okay, so you got your soil situation figured out. Then it's time to decide what to grow, right? But Riker says it's not as simple as just picking your favorite veggie.
Way more to it than that. He lays out all these factors farmers got to consider. Is the climate even right for what you want to grow? Some crops are super picky about the weather.
Kind of like those fussy houseplants, right? Need just the right amount of sun and all that.
Exactly. Riker uses soybeans as an example. They need tons of rain. Then you got other plants that do great in dry places, and then there's market demand, right? No point growing a ton of something nobody's gonna buy.
Yeah. Like that time I tried to sell homemade kombucha at the flea market. Not a single taker.
Haha. Well, Riker talks about the quinoa boom a while back. Suddenly everyone wanted this ancient grain, and farmers had to scramble to keep up.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I was trying to figure out how to cook it without it tasting like cardboard. So besides climate and, what people want, what else do farmers got to juggle when they're choosing what to grow?
Riker talks a lot about crop rotation. So instead of planting the same thing in the same spot year after year, you switch it up. It keeps the soil healthy, keeps pests and diseases from building up.
Smart. Kind of like diversifying your investment there. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. He talks about planting beans one year, then leafy greens the next. Beans put nitrogen back in the soil, which the greens love, like a natural fertilizer system.
Pretty cool. And I bet disease resistance is a big deal too, huh?
Huge. Riker brings up the banana plantations and how they're being wiped out by this Panama disease, a nasty fungal thing. Picking crops that are less prone to diseases where you are, it's key to having a good harvest.
It's like a constant battle against nature, isn't it?
Okay, so we've talked about the soil and picking what to grow, but what about the actual farm, the practices? Sustainable farming's a big deal these days. What are some of the things Riker highlights in the book?
Yeah, sustainable farming for sure. It's everywhere.
Right. So he covers a bunch of different stuff, from the old school methods like crop rotation to the newer things people are trying. One that's getting a lot of attention is no-till farming.
I've heard of that. It's where you don't plow the soil, right? Just kind of leave it alone.
Exactly. Less disruption. The idea is to prevent erosion and keep all those good microorganisms in the soil happy. Riker, he actually visited a no-till farm in the Midwest, and he said the soil was unbelievably rich, just crawling with earth.
That's awesome. But are there any downsides to not tilling?
Well, one thing is you might end up using more herbicides to deal with weeds. So, it's kind of a trade-off.
Gotcha. What about other sustainable practices? What else is out there?
Riker's a big fan of this thing called agroforestry. Basically, you mix trees in with your farm. He mentions this place. Singing Tree Farm, they're doing really well with it. They've got fruit trees integrated into their fields, and their other crops are actually producing more because of it.
Wow, so the trees are helping the other plants?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. They provide shade, which helps the soil hold on to moisture, and they attract those beneficial insects that eat the bad bugs. It just shows, like, working with nature can be way better than trying to fight it all the time.
Totally, I like that. And then there's organic farming, of course.
Right. Riker's got a whole chapter on organic farming, which is all about avoiding those synthetic pesticides and GMOs. He's honest, though. He says it can be tougher and often costs more, but he also says the quality of the food is, like, way better.
So it's like every approach has its pluses and minuses. It's about finding what works for you, for your farm, and what you believe in.
For sure.
All right, let's talk about something that always gets people riled up. GMOs. Genetically modified organisms. What does Riker say about those?
Well, first off, he acknowledges, like, there's a lot of controversy around GMOs. He lays out both sides. But he starts by pointing out that genetic modification, it's not really new. Like, humans have been doing it for ages through selective breeding.
Yeah, so like we've been messing with the genes of plants and animals for centuries to get the traits we want.
Exactly. He says modern biotechnology, it just allows us to do it more precisely.
Okay, so what are some of the good things about GMOs? Like, what are the potential benefits?
Riker talks about a bunch, like higher yields, crops that can resist pests, and even boost in the nutritional content of food. He uses golden rice as an example, which was engineered to have vitamin A to fight deficiency in some parts of the world.
Sounds like a game changer. But I know there are worries about GMOs too, right? What are some of the potential downsides that people talk about?
Some of the big concerns are like losing genetic diversity, weeds becoming resistant to herbicides, and then the big one, what are the long-term effects on people and the environment? We just don't know yet. Riker doesn't shy away from these concerns at all, and he really encourages readers to like think critically about the whole thing. It's complicated.
Yeah, lots to consider, for sure. Okay, so we've planted our crops, taken care of them, and now it's harvest time. But I bet there's more to harvesting than just picking the stuff, right?
Oh, yeah. For sure. Riker takes us on a tour through like the evolution of harvesting, from back in the day when it was all done by hand to the crazy machines they use now.
So from hand picking to giant combine harvesters.
Exactly. He talks about the pros and cons of both ways, saying it's all about balance, got to get the stuff off the field, but got to be careful not to damage it in the process.
Makes sense. He mentions the importance of timing too, right? Like knowing when to harvest.
Time. Riker explains how different crops have like telltale signs that they're ready. He talks about corn and wheat needing to reach a certain moisture level. It's all about knowing when to strike.
It's like a science, but also an art, huh? Okay, so you've harvested all this amazing food. How do you keep it fresh?
Yeah.
I'm guessing food preservation is a whole science in itself.
Got it. Riker walks us through all the different methods, starting with the oldest one, drying.
Good old sun drying.
It's timeless, whether it's out on racks or with fancy dehydrating.
What about freezing? That seems more modern, doesn't it?
Riker calls freezing nature's pause button. Pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
You can keep food for a long time and it keeps the nutrients and flavor. He points out, though, that it uses a lot of energy.
So again, trade-offs. What are the ways of preserving food does he talk about?
One of the biggest breakthroughs was canning. That's where you seal food in airtight containers to keep it from spoiling.
Oh yeah, canning. That's been around forever, hasn't it?
Right. Riker shares this little fun fact. Canning was actually invented way back during the Napoleonic Wars. This French guy, Nicolas Appert, figured it out. Napoleon needed a way to keep his troops fed, and cannon was the answer.
Wow, that's amazing. A wartime invention, huh?
Talk about ingenuity.
Okay, so we've covered growing, harvest, and preserving.
Yeah.
But that food doesn't magically appear on supermarket shelves, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole process of getting it out into the world. That's where marketing and distribution come in.
Absolutely. Riker dives into all the different ways farmers get their products to us, the consumers. He starts with the most direct way, selling straight to the customer.
Cutting out the middleman.
Exactly. He talks about the good and the bad of this approach. He uses Polyface Farm in Virginia as an example. They're like famous for doing it this way, selling everything through their farm store and a few other places.
So it's all about building those relationships directly with the people who eat your food.
It's huge. Riker says people are more and more willing to pay extra for good quality local food they can trust.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I bet it's not easy to do everything yourself, the direct-to-consumer thing.
For sure. Riker says you got to be good at marketing, and it can be tough to reach enough people to make a decent living.
So there are definitely challenges. What about farmers who want to sell to more people, not just locally?
That's where wholesale distribution comes in. Riker compares it to playing high-stakes poker.
Uh-huh, I like that. So what do farmers got to think about when they're going the wholesale route?
He brings up Organic Valley, that big cooperative, as a success story. They went all in on wholesale and did amazingly well, but they also had to deal with, the market going up and down, which can be stressful.
Yeah, you're taking a risk, putting your fate in the hands of forces you can't control.
For sure. And Riker really emphasizes the importance of logistics. How are you going to get your stuff to all those different places? How much is it going to cost to transport it? How do you make sure the quality is good all the way through?
It's a whole other level of complexity compared to just selling locally. What other distribution strategies does Riker talk about?
He mentions contract farming. That's where farmers make deals with buyers beforehand, agreeing on a price for a certain crop.
So you're guaranteed to sell your stuff, but you might be locked into a price.
Exactly. He uses Purdue Farms as an example. They have contracts with thousands of farmers who raise chickens just for their brand.
So it's like the farmers get a steady income and Purdue gets a steady supply of chickens. Sounds like a good deal for everyone, but are there any drawbacks to that?
Of course. The biggest one is what if the market price for chicken suddenly shoots up? You're stuck with that lower contract price, which might feel kind of unfair.
So you're trading potential big profits for stability and knowing what you're going to get. Interesting. What else does Riker cover in this section?
Well, then he moves on to branding and packaging. He talks about how important it is for farmers to make their products stand out. There's so much competition.
Gotta catch the customer's eye, right?
Totally. Riker says good branding and packaging can tell a story. It can communicate quality, what the farmer stands for, even the farm's history.
It's like a mini advertisement right there on the shelf.
Exactly. He even quotes Steve Jobs. Design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works. So it's got to be both attractive and functional.
Form and function. Classic combo. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, literally.
Yeah.
But there's still more to explore in the world of modern agriculture.
What's really fascinating is how this age-old thing, farming, is constantly changing and adapting to the world around it.
It's amazing. And that's what we'll keep digging into in part 3 of this deep dive.
Can't wait. We're going to talk about the big challenges facing agriculture, like climate change and the growing population, and what people are doing to find solutions. It's going to be good.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into modern agriculture. We've been using Conrad Reicher's book, The Ultimate Guide to Modern Agriculture, to really explore all the ins and outs of this world.
And for this last part, I thought it would be cool to zoom in on some of the big takeaways that really hit home for me.
Yeah, I'm ready for some wisdom. What really stuck with you?
Well, one thing Riker keeps coming back to is how important it is to really understand your local ecosystem, You can't just farm in isolation. Every decision you make, it impacts the whole system.
That makes sense. It's like seeing your farm as part of this bigger web of life.
Exactly. He talks about how it's all connected, The soil, the water, the different plants and animals, even those tiny bugs that pollinate our crops.
It's easy to forget about those little guys, but they're so important.
Totally. Riker talks about how important it is to create habitats where those beneficial insects can thrive, like planting wildflowers around your field. It's about working with nature, not against it.
It's funny. I've noticed way more bees and butterflies in my garden since I started planting native flowers. I'm actually helping the ecosystem just by making my garden prettier.
That's awesome. It's the little things, right? And that same idea applies to dealing with pests and diseases. Riker's really into this thing called integrated pest management. It's like a more holistic approach.
Oh yeah, he mentioned that. What's that all about again?
So instead of just spraying everything with pesticides, use a bunch of different techniques together, you introduce beneficial insects that eat the bad bug, you rotate your crop, you make the habitat less appealing to pests. It's about being more strategic.
So it's like finding those natural solutions whenever you can. It seems like a lot of modern agriculture is moving in that direction, working with nature instead of trying to control it.
Totally agree. And that connects to another big point that Riker makes. Building relationships with consumers. At the end of the day, farmers are growing food for people, not just for profit.
Yeah, he's definitely passionate about that whole farm-to-table thing.
He is. He thinks it's a great way to bridge the gap between the people who grow the food and the people who eat it. It helps us appreciate where our food comes from.
There's something really special about knowing where your food comes from, Like meeting the farmer who grew it. I remember visiting a local farm a while back, and it totally changed how I thought about food.
It's an eye-opener, for sure. And there are so many ways to make those connections. Farmers markets, CSA programs, even online platforms where you can buy straight from the farm.
It's about making the whole food system more transparent, more fair, so everyone benefits.
Exactly. So as we wrap up our deep dive here, I want to leave you with one more thought from Riker that I think is super important. Never stop learning.
That's true for just about anything, but especially agriculture, right? It's always changing, always something new to discover.
Totally. Riker's always encouraging farmers to stay curious, Keep up with the latest research, try new things, be open to new ideas. You got to be adaptable and innovative in this business.
I bet collaboration is important too, right? Farmers sharing their knowledge and learning from each other's experience.
Oh, he's all about that. He believes that by working together, farmers can solve problems, figure out the best ways to do things, and ultimately, create a better system that benefits everyone.
It's pretty amazing thinking about all the people out there working hard to make sure we have good, healthy food. So that wraps up our exploration of the world of modern agriculture. If you want to learn more, we highly recommend checking out Conrad Reicher's book, The Ultimate Guide to Modern Agriculture. You can find it on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.